Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 13th, 2021 Community Formation Commission meeting. We will call the meeting to order at 5:34 p.m. And Sam, if we could do a roll call.
Sure. Commissioner Adam Malikan,
Present.
Commissioner Alonso,
Here.
Commissioner Chavez,
Here.
Chair Escobedo,
Here.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Here.
Commissioner O'Gorman,
Here.
and Commissioner Rodriguez, absent. Commissioner Sander, absent. Commissioner Wood,
Present.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Here.
and Commissioner Reynaud.
I think Commissioner Reynaud might be a little late. I know he kind of had a tight deadline from when he finished at work.
Actually, I see him in the attendee list, and so I'm going to see if I can convert him to panelists.
Okay.
But that completes roll.
Thank you, Sam. So we'll move on to the next item for today's meeting, and it would be general public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. And Sam, do we have anyone from the public that would like to give public comment?
Give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand in the app. There's no one that indicated that they wanted to speak. Chair.
Thank you, Sam. All right, so we will move on to the administrative agenda, and we will start with announcements. I put this here, we put this here for just general information that we can relay to you during the meeting. Today, the only announcement that we have is a good one, it's a big one, is Chief Malekian got approval to stay on as chief until they find a replacement for the chief of police. And so Chief Malekian will be with us throughout this process, which is good news. And I want to make sure that the commission knew that. Next is we will move on to consideration and action on draft commission formation meeting minutes for September 22nd, 2021. Does anyone have any edits to the minutes? Give it a minute. And if there are no edits, is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Real quick, Chair, let me open it up to public comment. If there's anyone that would like to make a comment on the meeting minutes of September 22nd, 2021, please raise your hand. I see no hands raised, Chair.
Thank you for the reminder, Sam. Back to the commission. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes or amend them?
So moved to approve.
So we have a
Second.
motion from Rachel, a second from Louisa. Any discussion? I'm not seeing any. So Sam, we're doing roll call votes now, right? So if we could do a
Correct.
roll call vote.
I believe there was a change in the Brown Act that requires a roll call vote for these items. Let me take roll. So the motion is made by Commissioner Rachel Johnson to approve the minutes as presented. It's seconded by Commissioner Wood. Commissioner Adam Malikan.
Yay.
I'm sorry, did you say yay?
Yes, yay.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Alonso,
Yay.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez,
Aye.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Mary O'Gorman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez absent, Commissioner Sander absent, and Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
and Commissioner Reynaud. Still
Yes.
not- Oh, got it. Thank you. Motion passes, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. And with that, we'll move on to the last item of our administrative agenda, which is consideration and action on the scope of work for the survey partner. We presented this at the last meeting, but we thought it would be good to just give another recap. Sam, if you could bring up, thank you. Rachel, did you want to give a quick update on the survey group? And I know you met with Dr. Sharkey from UCSB.
Yeah, that would be the main update. And thank you to Commissioner O'Gorman and Commissioner Rodriguez for connecting us with Jill Sharkey at UCSB. So we had a really great meeting with her, and she did not have the capacity to present her own scope of work to actually be our survey partner, but is willing to partner with us more informally on development of survey questions, things like that. So yeah, the survey working group feels good about putting forward the CCI scope of work to be considered as our formal survey partner. And then we will continue to have conversations with both Dr. Sharkey at UCSB and Dr. Z. Reese at City College, who are sort of local advisors who are also willing to meet with the working group.
Any questions from the commission on the scope of work? Anything about the survey partner themselves? We'll do our best to answer questions. Give it a minute. All right, so if there are no questions, then I will go to Sam and see if there's any public comment that, or community members that want to make public comment.
Sure. So let me open up the public comment portion for the consideration and action on the scope of work for the survey partner. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on this matter, please click on the hand raise icon. I see no one in the public that would like to speak on this.
Thank you, Sam. So I'll turn it back to the commission if there's any discussion or if there's a motion to approve the scope of work from CCI.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Christian. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Rachel. Any discussion on the motion? Guessing not seeing any. Sam, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Sure. So the motion was to approve the scope of work for the survey partner made by Commissioner Alonso, seconded by Rachel Johnson. Commissioner Adamalekan,
Yay.
Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Commissioner Wood,
Aye.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes, please.
Commissioner O'Gorman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez, Commissioner Sander, Vice Chair Zepeda, Vice Chair Zepeda, hear her, and Commissioner Reynaud.
Affirmative.
Motion passes, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. All right. So we will work with Sam and John to get this approved and set as quick as possible. And the survey group will work with CCI to get everything ready while we're still developing the model and having our discussion. So with that, we'll close out that item and the administrative agenda, and we will move on to working group updates.
Sorry.
And if I could ask that while we're, if we could have our mics muted while we're going through today's discussion. And then when you're ready to speak, unmute yourself. Getting a little bit of feedback. So for working group updates, which work group would like to go first? Not all work groups have to go, but if you do have an update, now would be the time.
The education group, we could go first.
Okay.
Since the last time we met, I believe it's been a few weeks. We have recorded our first video, and we are now in the editing process, which is will involve kind of what has to do with what the CFC is about and why it was created and what the plan is. So we're now working with the editing team to get moving and moving forward on that. That's kind of where we are right now. It's been fun and an interesting process, and we've been working with SB City TV, and they've been fantastic to work with so far. Jordan, do you have any?
Oh, go ahead.
No, just a huge thanks to Gabe, Anna,
Yes.
I believe Alejandra Gutierrez helped there, and Oscar Gutierrez, and then also to Luisa, who's really spearheading the project. So huge thank you. We'll be meeting again with our group in the next couple of weeks. Again, as things progress and as we decide on things, that's when we as a group can start building out a lot of our work. And so it's really contingent upon what we decide and as we move forward. So looking forward to hearing more and working with all of you on these next steps and then getting that information out to the community. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And Louisa, did you want to talk a little bit about the outreach that you and Lizzie did, or did you want to say that for later?
Yeah, so Lizzie Rodriguez and I spent the last weekend or 2 weeks going to the police briefings at the Santa Barbara Police Department, to 5 different briefings to introduce the CFC, to talk about who we are and where we are in the process, and to provide an opportunity for questions. And one thing that came up, we had also talked about how they would love to see and be able to talk to more commissioners. So they invite you to come to the Santa Barbara Police Department or to meet elsewhere in the community if those of you who are more comfortable with that. It was a very interesting experience. I had never been to the police department before, so it was a good experience for me, and I really appreciated the time to get to know everyone and to be able to talk a little about who we are in the commission and where we are and our process and how that's going to look. So that's what we did the last 2 weeks.
And big shout out to Louisa and Lizzie. It was no small feat. It was many meetings, and it was long days, and so we really appreciate it.
And further, we plan to do this with other community groups as well. I mean, we are going to be doing the community cafes in terms of the education groups, but I would also like to start meeting, and I encourage other commissioners to start meeting with other groups to talk about who we are and what we do, and talk about, give opportunities to ask questions and raise concerns. So that's kind of also our next steps.
And we have the work that the work group made of Rich, Mary, and Jacob had compiled a list of really good groups to reach out to and some upcoming meetings that we can definitely use.
Yeah, I was going to say something about that, and especially piggybacking on what Louisa said about the presentations at the police department, because if we're at the place that we're doing that now, if we can share, like if you have a basic outline or script or something, just so that in going to these other groups, and I think everyone should have received, Sam, I sent a while ago the Google Sheet link or whatever to the different groups, but you know, that would be good, because if we're at the point that we're doing that.
So it's not, yes, I would be happy to share what we have, but it was more just kind of an introduction of the commission itself, and not necessarily, and we introduced the conceptual model of where we are, but we didn't talk about anything further than that because we haven't made any decisions.
Yeah.
So it was very, very bare bones. It was more, hi, how are you, kind of thing, and giving an opportunity to talk and just see who we are. But I would be happy to share that if anyone is interested in doing that. We could have more informal talks as well outside of, you know, in the community as individuals as well.
Yeah, there's a couple groups I think that meet next week. The NAMI, which is the National Association of Mentally Ill. Basically, it's family members of mentally ill, and a lot of them mentally ill who've been incarcerated. So I was going to try to go to that and just talk at their public comment and, you know, introduce us and say, you know, basically telling people stay tuned, because, you know, at some point, I guess when we integrate the survey and the outreach and everything, you know, once in one place, then be more formal.
Be more formal, yeah. Yeah.
And just for Brown Act reasons, I'm going to read your comment, Jordan, in the chat. And Jordan just said, I hope SBPD feel comfortable attending our meetings as well. And we've extended the invite and the information, and I believe we have Sergeant Casey Corbett on the call as well, watching
Awesome.
today.
Yeah, I just want to encourage that, and when we're doing the outreach, that folks can tune in and join us for our time together, because it's good information. At least I nerd out on it, so I think it's fun. So maybe other people might not, but I think we should continue to open that up.
Agreed. Cami?
Just a quick question about, I know this is something that's brand new to the process, this type of outreach, but I'm assuming you got some interesting feedback, some good feedback, maybe some not so good feedback, and kind of curious about how to handle the feedback if people are going to start going to different groups so that everybody can be aware of it. So just something to think about how you want to do that.
Good point. I
That
think,
is a, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, that is a really good question. We did get feedback and some questions, and I wonder if there is a place where we could start kind of compiling the questions or concerns in a central place where we could all see it. I don't know, maybe that's that shared document that we've had before, but I think that's a good idea.
Maybe
Yeah.
I can add another page to the working document that we have, or create a file that's the working document and a feedback form where people can just start putting that information, if that works for everybody.
Yeah, that sounds great. And then we'll work with John to make sure that if there are any Brown Act concerns, we can address those as well.
I'm also just wondering if that's, if we're going to start compiling feedback, if that's something we might also let CCI know, that, like, right, I mean, like, obviously we're working with them specifically on the survey related to response to our model, but if there's other qualitative feedback, they are going to help us with identifying key themes in the qualitative feedback that we get. So maybe, yeah, if we can just start compiling that, we can also share that as a data set with them to see what they can do with it.
Great idea. All right. Any other updates? The survey group kind of gave their update with the scope of work. I'm not sure if there's anything beyond that. I don't think so. So if there are no other updates from work groups, Sam, if we could open up public comment for this item. And then if there is, after that, I believe we can close out this item.
Sure, Chair, just give me 1 second. if there's anyone that would like to comment on the working group updates, please click on the hand raise feature. Anyone like to speak on the working group updates, please click on the hand raise feature. Seeing none, Chair, no public
Thank you,
comment.
Sam. So we will close out that item and we will move on to the reason we're all here today. The continued discussion on the review board authorities and procedures. And with that, I will turn it over to Cami.
Thank you, Gabe. Just pull up the screen here. So that's the longest I've gone time-wise without talking to one of you, probably since we started this project, and I feel like it's been a lot longer than just a few weeks. So it's really good to see you guys again. I wanted to kind of give you, excuse me, as I scroll through here, I wanted to give all of you just a little reminder of where we are. So the last couple of meetings, you have done some amazing brainstorming on the purpose, composition, and then the last meeting we talked extensively about training. And you all were sent the link to the working document where I've combined a lot of, or I have transferred all of the stuff from our brainstorming sessions into that working document. And in some cases, like, was someone trying to say something?
I don't have it, or maybe I didn't look in the right place, because I was just going to ask.
Okay, I will send it directly to all of you, just so you have the link again. And also because before I do that, I will add the place for feedback as well, so that you all have that. So the when we talked about the purpose, for instance, there were lots of things that really came up in purpose that felt like it fit better in composition or training or authorities. And so when you look at that document, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, you will see where people or where I have put those different items. So what's left for today as far as review board is concerned is the authority piece. So we'll be talking specifically about what authorities all of you in all of your imagination that they could have. Do keep in mind that although in brainstorming the sky is the limit, you are eventually going to have to pull this into a recommendation. So also keep that at the back of your mind. If we get through this, we actually have a lot more time than we normally have in a meeting to go through these practices. So I'm hoping that once we're done with this, we can circle back to purpose, because I would love to have some more conversation with all of you regarding purpose, because I think that if we can really hone in on that one piece, that it will make the work to narrow down the others much easier, and will make the conversation about the auditor monitor piece maybe a little simpler as well. So before I get started, I just wanted to let you know kind of in my mind what the process would be today. Does anybody have any questions before we start? Okay, great. Okay, so let's get down to powers and duties. So some examples of powers and duties for a review board are recommendations regarding written policies, procedures, practices that can also involve training in some cases, receiving and considering the findings and recommendations regarding complaints filed by the community. In some cases, they participate in the hiring of the chief of police, perhaps are on members of the committee or put on a hiring committee as part of that process. Access to records, the ability to adopt rules and regulations necessary for it to conduct its business. Sometimes they propose their annual budget, annual reporting, and recommendation of additional investigation of complaints. So just as a refresher, so in many cases, review boards review investigations. Oops, sorry. I was trying to find your faces again there. In many cases, review boards review investigations that are completed by another entity, whether that's internal affairs or, in some cities where they have independent investigatory authority, they review those investigations. When a review board reviews an investigation, they also often have other abilities, such as they're looking at an investigation and they're like, well, I don't understand why this witness and this witness were not interviewed. So they might ask questions, or they might send it back for more information. In some cities, they also have the ability to send it back for reinvestigation or ask for an independent investigation to be conducted. And I will say that latter ability is a newer phenomenon in the world of civilian oversight review boards. It's the advancement of that hybrid piece that we've talked about so often. So these are just some examples of some authorities, and what I would like to do is to start brainstorming about the things that you would like your review board to be able to do. And I think also if there are things that you don't want them to be able to do, I think that's a good place to put that as well. Okay, I'm sorry. Who?
Just wanted to clarify. So this is sort of distinct from the auditor monitor role, because if there's review boards that don't have an auditor monitor, then there might be more different duties in my mind. But so for instance, if someone has questions about an investigation, like that might be something that if the auditor monitor is there, can assist.
So often the authorities of a review board exist regardless of the auditor, and that's because they're the community piece of it. So often a jurisdiction gives them the authority so that community members always have a fairly prominent part in, or a very distinct part in the process. Mm-hmm. Even when there's an auditor involved, they try to put some separation there because they also may be reviewing occasionally the auditor's work as well. And so it gives that ability to have what is perceived and often actual unbiased method of review. Because it's completely outside, it is volunteer community members and not a paid member of a government or law enforcement itself reviewing those. Now, I'm telling you that, and I can tell you there's probably one out there that does do it differently because they have an auditor, but in general, they often have very distinct responsibilities that are independent of that. Okay, does anybody want to jump in?
I'll kick it off if we're brainstorming. So with that bottom piece, the community stakeholder outreach, the survey work group has talked about this a little bit, how things like a climate survey should be done by the eventual oversight body, since that's something in our survey efforts we don't have the capacity to do. And I don't know how much detail we want, but maybe, probably annual surveys are a bit much if you really want to do a broad, swath of the community, but maybe biannually or something like that to sort of check in with how the community thinks the oversight body's doing. And I appreciate you reminding us to go back to sort of the purpose and those values, because I feel like this is a big part of that. If we're actually going to rebuild trust and things like that with the community, that they should be checking in on that. And then the other thing I guess wanted to ask a question, because I really am intrigued by the participation in the hiring of the chief of police and or maybe other key staff roles, because I think that's also huge in terms of a lot of distrust is, lack of transparency or feeling that there's still the sort of channels of power that don't include the community when it comes to policing. So I'm just curious, Cami, if you could talk a little more about where you've seen that work and maybe more importantly where it hasn't worked, or if there's does that cause problems or resentment, especially because I can imagine it might.
Well, so most of the time where it works is where civilian oversight is part of the process. There are cities where you have a commission that has the ability to hire or fire a chief, which becomes often very controversial, and particularly if they are volunteers or appointed. In some cities, those commissioners are elected, and so it becomes a little less controversial because it's almost an extension of the public as their representative doing that. But in a lot of cities, what we see when this occurs is that perhaps in some places it is the chair of the board or an appointee from the board that is sent to sit on a committee of people working toward a hiring committee, for lack of a better term. And then that also in some cities can be, city council members. Sometimes it's a public safety director or a city manager. It just depends on the form of city government. And so that person then sits on that process as part of interviews. Now, in some cities, they may not sit on a hiring committee, but there is a part in the process where maybe there's oral boards for the candidates, where members of the Civilian Oversight Review Board may sit in on those. So there are different ways to look at it. They can, in some cities, they're very involved. In some cities, they're part of the process, but are not part of kind of that hiring committee.
If I may, I'm curious, and I think this might be a question for Chief Melekian, is what is the current hiring process for the Chief of Police? And then maybe that'll inform on what sort of role our review board could play. Chief Melekian. Oh, hi, Chief.
Yeah, good evening and thank you. Currently, and actually, I think historically, generally the city turns the hiring process, the initial application process, over to a headhunter firm, for want of a better term, a consulting firm that specializes in hiring government executives. Generally, that group will collect, I should back up, that before the application process is opened, the job description is fleshed out. And if you recall recently when the police chief search process began last summer, there was a community survey essentially around what were people looking for in the police chief, and the reactions or the answers to that helped shape the job description that was then in turn posted. As you know, that process was suspended when the city administrator made the decision to step down, but that process will be reinstituted probably after the first of the year, would be my guess. But in any event, so what happens is that the headhunter firm will collect applications. To give you some idea of the climate, current climate, when Chief Lenau was hired in 2016, the headhunting firm received 97 applications. We received 26 applications for the current recruitment, and 6 of those people did not meet minimum qualifications. Generally, what happens then is the headhunting firm will put a list together, and they will meet with either the city, usually the city manager, or a committee that's been put together. And I've seen it done different ways in different jurisdictions. And the headhunting firm will usually recommend some number. They may say, take this 6, this 8. When I was involved in the process with Seattle, they actually went through, they wanted 15. They wanted the top 15 candidates because they have that many. And usually there'll then be a discussion about the people who aren't being recommended and why. And that process generally takes a while. It's at that point that there's usually some preliminary interview process. Santa Barbara has historically involved members of the community in that process to interview let's say, just to pick a number for a city of our size, it would probably be 8 to 10 finalists. And there's an interview process, whatever that gets designed, and it varies slightly from time to time. But then they usually gets down to the final 3. And then I've seen it do all kinds of, go all kinds of different ways. When I was hired in Pasadena and it was down to the final 3, the city manager visited each of us in our current workplace because we were all outside candidates. Seattle had the finalists, there were 5 in Seattle, had the finalists come back and do a formal presentation to the community group. I've seen people that have meet and greets, community meet and greets, where those finalists meet and interact with members of the community, and then there's some sort of evaluative process that takes place. And ultimately, it will end up in the lap of the hiring authority, and whatever that preliminary process was. Usually, then the hiring authority, in our case, the city manager, would meet with each of the finalists, would review the input that they had, and make a selection. Officially, that decision is only within the purview of the that final decision is in the purview of the city administrator. However, I don't know of any city administrator that hasn't reviewed the finalists with the city council. And I suspect in those cities where there is a police commission or an oversight board of some kind, would probably meet in some kind of closed session to talk through the finalists, and undoubtedly the members of that group would have already, in one format or another, as I described, would have met the finalists and would probably have an opinion. Santa Barbara, historically, recently we had a lieutenant's exam and a lieutenant's interview. A member of the commission, both the Fire and Police Commission and a member of this body, sat on that interview process. We have historically involved community members. My guess would be that the Oversight Commission, the one that you create, will have some role in that to be defined. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Chief Malikian.
Just
Mary?
one comment, I believe, and John Doimus, maybe you can confirm, currently the city charter does give the Fire and Police Commission at least the ability to make a recommendation or something like that. And ultimately the charter gives the city manager the role. So I guess that's just kind of a reminder that one thing that I guess we need to be mindful of is things that will need amending the charter, I guess.
Correct. Well, correct. Commissioner O'Gorman, Chair Escobedo. First, the chief eloquently, as usual, and very detailed, went into more of the specifics he would know about than me. But the city charter does allow the Fire and Police Commission to make a recommendation in the hire and firing of a fire and police chief. And how it's done is like how the chief has said. Usually, the board has elected 1 or 2 people to sit on an interview panel, and then they meet with the and then they confer and have a discussion with the city administrator in closed session. And then the charter does specifically provide in terms of once the selection has been made by the city administrator to go into closed session with the city council to obtain the approval of the candidate. So those are the 2 processes.
So I guess that from what I'm hearing from your current process, that you have civilians involved in the process, that to have additional civilians in the process sounds like a potential charter change. I think that there is nothing wrong with having kind of this subset of items that in the future you might want to recommend. I think at this point, recommending charter changes or pushing for them is not necessarily in this group's purview. That doesn't mean that they cannot be recommended at a later date with reasoning for that. So I think focusing on what you can recommend that can be done through ordinance only is probably the best use of the time. And I appreciate, Mary, you asking the question, which kind of brings up this really important point of, and we've talked about it at the very beginning, that there are some things that you have already with charter commissions that are doing some work that you, when the ordinance is actually created, there will have to be some work to make sure that there's no overstepping. But that doesn't mean you can't put these down right now as brainstorming in your brainstorming session, knowing that at some point you can decide whether or not you want to have kind of this addendum to your recommendations that say at a future time, we'd like there to be given consideration to. Because I don't want to stifle the brainstorming at all by everybody worrying what can and cannot be in there. I think it's important for you as individuals to say what would be important to, if you could have it in there, what seems to be something that would be beneficial to the process.
True. I guess it's just in creating expectations, whether it's of this group or the public, it's kind of acknowledging things like that. Doesn't mean you omit something, but it's hard to, you know, I guess segregate some of that information. So.
No,
Thank you.
I understand.
Thank you, Cammie, and thank you, Mary. It was under my understanding that the city administrator is the sole hire of the police chief, and so I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. The charter in general, but that's just my 2 cents.
I mean, I think, you know, when I initially asked to get more information on maybe how I would word it, I feel like maybe just enough for the brainstorming is just saying sort of a, you know, a meaningful or authentic, you know, engagement with that process of hiring and firing, right? Like, so if that is a closed session with the city administrator, or, you know, certainly the ability to ask questions at a, you know, a public part of the process or something like that. But maybe that's enough for now until we think through a little bit further.
I would like to just jump in with that very first one and talk about making recommendations regarding written policies, practices, and procedures. I know that that would be something I would be interested in as part of this commission.
That's great. And then kind of back to Mary, one of your first comments, that this piece often does have a lot of interaction with the auditor monitor. Right. And sometimes that can be that the recommendations come out of the auditor's work, or it could be that the auditor guides the process with input from the review board. So that can look a couple of different ways. You can have them be as involved in the process or not as involved in the process as you want them to be. But it often is, there is a lot of interaction. And plus, things like policies, practices, training, a group effort is always best in that case, in my opinion, because you need someone that has some knowledge of the current practices, the person who's done an audit or has been monitoring those practices, and then working with the review board to really kind of get an outsider's perspective on them as well. So something to keep in mind.
If I can follow up on that one, I would also like for there to be some sort of stipulation that if the Santa Barbara Police Department does not accept the recommendations, that the chief of police has to come back to the oversight body and explain why.
Which recommendations, Gabe? I'm sorry.
Policy recommendations, practices, procedures. So those based on the bullet point just before that, if the oversight body does make recommendations and the police chief decides not to accept them, providing that rationale at a public meeting.
I think that's really important. Kind of a friendly addition to that is also that it occur within a specified time limit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of the next thing too, looking at access to records. Obviously, I think we all probably agree they need to have access to records, but I think maybe with a little further detail that, again, something like that is received within a reasonable amount of time. And, you know, I think, I'm sure, right, this part, I don't know if this is the right place to say sort of, you know, dedicated staff and or, you know, liaison to the police department that ensures that access to records happens in a reasonable amount of time.
That's a great one too. Sorry. There you are.
What about?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cami.
No, I was just going to follow up on what you just said, Rachel, about the access to records. I don't know how you feel about it, but like when you get into writing the recommendations, being specific enough to say all records allowable by law and to be included, because sometimes what happens is that if you're reviewing a case, there are some cities that don't get any of the records that they get a report written by either the lieutenant in internal affairs or the chief that explains the findings, but they don't get to see any of the interviews transcribed. They don't get to see any video, photos, nothing. And so I think that's also something to consider. Now, in some cases, collective bargaining agreements and state statutes disallow some of that information. And so that has to be taken into consideration. But that's also, we have John to help us sort that out after we have all of the recommendations on the table.
Yeah, I definitely like that, adding in sort of the specificity of like access to the original data files wherever possible, rather than, yeah, kind of filtered results.
And again, for Brown Act reasons, I'm going to read what's in the chat. Chief Malekian put, it will be necessary to define records in quotation.
So when you're talking about records, are you specifically referring to investigative files? So sorry, because I know that it gets a little more complicated, particularly given state laws when we talk about personnel files.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely recognizing personnel files, that's always going to be a little bit of a different situation. But I feel like, I guess, I don't know, any number of things like complaint records rather than complaint summaries or, you know, statistical summaries, like actually getting raw data wherever possible, or original, kind of original recordings or written statements rather than summaries.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Anything else jumping out to people? Christian?
Yeah, a little bit of different direction, but it seems to be a facet of a lot of the examples that you forwarded to us of the ability to contract with investigators or legal counsel. I don't know if that would be specifically the purview of an auditor monitor or like a staff person or the review board itself, but it seems that that is like a facet of most of these ordinances.
That's a really good point. So there are those who have that stipulated in the ordinance that don't use it on a day-to-day basis, but have it in case of a conflict, particularly the case of outside legal. They have it in case there's a conflict, so that they can make sure that things can be resolved in a way that is beneficial to the community as a whole, the broader community. And then outside investigators, that would be really important, given the fact that when you've talked about the auditor having the ability to do independent investigations as kind of as needed basis, I think let's keep it in here for now. I think, and then you can determine as we finalize recommendations who do you want to have the ability to hire? Do you need a board vote to then instruct the auditor to then hire? So I think we can work out the very specific pieces of that, but I think it's important to have it in there.
Yeah, agreed. And just like more broadly, Cami, maybe you can answer this, but like, on those types of decisions, do you see, or just like the authorities of these of the boards in general, do you tend to see some of the authorities requiring like a full council vote, or like just do certain items have to go back to the council for review, or is this like, are they usually like fully independent of the council?
So there are some cases where if there's a conflict that's unresolvable, then it might go to the council. But for the most part, when you're adding in authorities like these, trying to keep the board or the mechanism as a whole as independent as possible is going to be very important for it building legitimacy. So that's, so while there are some examples, it's not necessarily like when we're talking about hiring outside legal counsel or outside investigators, normally that's built in, the process is normally built into the ordinance itself of how they, like, perhaps it's not just a normal majority, maybe it's 2/3 of the board. It differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but often requires, if they're going to initiate either of those things, it requires a vote, but doesn't necessarily have to go to council. Rachel?
Yeah, just to pick up on a couple of other pieces, the annual budget piece. I mean, I absolutely, think the Oversight Committee should have access to funds or some mechanism to request funds and present that to council. I'm not sure, exactly kind of what, if it's their piece of the budget, what we flesh out with that, but certainly, find a way to ensure that the oversight body is supported financially as well. We've got a very supportive council for this process who's made contracts happen really quickly when we've needed consultants, and I think that's been super useful for us being able to move forward quickly. So I think, in that sense, in the longer term, thinking through things like things that we haven't necessarily had to restrict ourselves to, like getting multiple bids for outside consultants or things like that when we think about budgets. But yeah, just to make sure that mechanism is there. And then kind of related to that, the annual reporting piece, like absolutely, I feel like this body is, you know, beholden to the community in many ways above anything else. So you know, some sort of annual report made public that that, yeah, probably, you know, specifically addresses the amount of funds that were spent on the work, as well as sort of the outcomes of that, such that something like the annual report would also be something that serves as something to respond to in things like the climate survey or like ongoing community surveys.
I guess just as a, I guess, practical power or duty, probably one of the first things will be, as you have adopt rules and regulations, probably bylaws, kind of before anything else, just so that that's, they're clear on that. And I guess, and Cami, you might see this in other areas, like what we're doing now in this process is something that some boards, once they're appointed, have to start from scratch, right? So, but I think they'll still need to have bylaws and rules, all that.
Yeah, that's great. And some, this might be too much into the weeds, but in some cases, it's established in ordinance that they have to come up with those in a specified time limit, or they have to have those before they can conduct the day-to-day business. Like sometimes there's some stipulations in it to make sure that everything's in order before they get started, kind of helping a step towards helping them succeed.
And have a chair, vice chair, and all that.
Okay. What about subpoena power? And like under what circumstances, like what would be the restrictions?
So subpoena, so I'm just going to start the conversation by saying that every board that I've ever worked with, that is one of the first things that they want is subpoena power. There are, and I think John can join us, if could refresh us on the abilities. I believe that, and I apologize, I can't remember if it's this Police and Fire Commission or if it's a different city where they have the subpoena authority. So, and I know that in like Madison, for instance, the board has to go to the Police and Fire Commission to actually issue the subpoena. So do you mind kind of refreshing our memory on that piece?
Sure, absolutely, Cami, members of the board. So there's actually two boards that have subpoena power that I know for sure. I can't recall any others. I believe it's only two. It's the Fire and Police Commission and the Civil Service Commission. And the reason why they have subpoena powers is because they do conduct hearings into matters. For example, Civil Service does employment hearings, everything else. So if I need to subpoena a non-city witness or the other side wants to subpoena them, what we do is issue the subpoena through the city clerk. The subpoena then is served, as any other subpoena would be, and disobedience to the subpoena would constitute a misdemeanor. So we do have to for appearances of witnesses and to bring certain materials, we do have that with two of our boards. If any other questions, I'm here.
Thank you. So I will say, and I feel like I often feel like I need to give the honest assessment of subpoena power. I think that for many review entities, it's really important, not because they use it, it's because they have it if they need it. There are civilian oversight entities out there, review boards, who have subpoena power that use it frequently because of the inability to get access to records. or to get witnesses to provide statements, to obtain video footage, particularly if they're doing an independent investigation. That becomes really important. I have to be honest and say there are a ton of civilian oversight boards out there who have it, who have maybe used it once or twice in their existence. So it is something that I think it's definitely on our list of effective practices. I just feel like I can't count the number of times where there's a crisis in a city and someone gets up and says, if we have a review board with subpoena power, it will fix all of our problems. And I just feel like I have to, it's my public announcement for the evening, that it is important, but also understand what it really does for you. But if you want to have independent investigative powers as needed, or the ability to initiate an independent investigation, subpoena power becomes really important when you're doing an investigation. So.
And if I may, Cami, too, just to confirm, it is those two boards that I mentioned, the only ones. And if everyone's interested, if you go online, you put in Santa Barbara Municipal Code, Chapter 9.118 is in regards to the subpoenas that the Fire and Police Commission has. It goes into detail in terms of testimony, failure to obey. And then section 3.16420 is for the Civil Service Commission. It's only one section for them, but it talks about the ability to issue, and it goes through the city clerk's office, as I mentioned. And those are a good read, as well as just understanding boards and powers. A good way to do that, section 800 of the city charter talks about all our boards, our charter boards at least in place, and it goes over their powers. It's even worth a read to look at our city charter as well to get an understanding of that.
John, is it possible to send those out to the commission after the meeting?
Absolutely, we'll do, Chair Escobedo, no problem.
And you're talking about the municipal code, right?
Yes, Commissioner Alonso. The municipal code, in terms of the charter, won't have language of the subpoena power, but the municipal code will have language of the subpoena power of the fire and police and the civil service. And I'll send those sections out.
And like an ordinance could effectively like establish subpoena power for a board or a commission without having to change the charter.
An ordinance can. I mean, if you look at the way the law it's structured, charters are stronger in priority in terms of than ordinances. It would be charter, ordinances, and resolutions, kind of that way. But you have mention of both these boards in both the municipal code and the charter. The charter really sets out the purviews, and then the municipal code, as long as it's not in conflict, can do additional things, and that's where you see the subpoena power come in terms of where it's stated in the municipal code.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Is this where we would put the training, like we talked about last time, that receiving or participating in various trainings, or would that be just part of the ordinance?
Well, I think it's good to put in as part of the duties the requirement of training.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay, well, I put that.
okay.
Or I would.
And then when you get into finalizing the recommendations, then what happens is that the duty then combines itself with your training piece that you talked about previously, that training is required and must include, and then you can list the recommendations of the required training specifically.
Maybe because I think like making recommendations regarding policies, practices, and procedures that we have up there already is pretty broad, and I think it captures a lot of what we've been talking about and what's so attractive to us, or at least in the conversations we've had about auditor monitor, right? Because it's about identifying patterns, it's about reviewing policies, about being proactive and preventing misconduct before it happens, right? Which is the ideal situation, right? So we don't have to deal with it on the other end. And so I'm just curious about like further powers and duties that would lend themselves to that outcome. So is that like, do we want to be specific about how often this is happening? Is this like annual? Is this quarterly reviews? Like, do we want to be specific about what policies, like what practices, what procedures? Like that's, I think that's broad enough to cover it, but I'm thinking about like how specific we want the language to be regarding how often and what specifically we're auditing or do we want to be more broad?
Well,
for-
so, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mary.
I just said we're broad at this point until they do bylaws, I guess. But
what my first thought is that you, my recommendation would be to not limit what they can make recommendations on, because you just have, there's no way that you can foresee what issues might come up, and there may be, and I think law enforcement would agree. I mean, you have a set of policies and procedures now. You have no idea what might happen to change your mind on some of those 6 months from now, 6 years from now. It doesn't, you know. But I do think that I want to give you some food for thought about how some cities handle it, particularly those that have an auditor monitor collaboration. For instance, in Tucson, the review board occasionally asks for audits on specific issues. Maybe they keep seeing things that come up in complaints they're reviewing, and so they want to know more about it. In some cities, it's much more random, and that those audits are kind of done at the discretion of the auditor or monitor. But all of that work is then reviewed by the board. In some cases, there are certain audits that are mandated. For instance, random audits of investigations, random audits of use of force reporting. So those types of things can be dictated by the board or can be done in collaboration with the auditor. So, which I realize is still incredibly broad, but I just want to kind of give you some thoughts as to how that does present itself in some cities. You want to make sure that you are specific enough so no one is unclear of what they're supposed to be doing, but not so specific that you have pigeonhole, like you have this that you can do and nothing else. So I think that that's really, really important to consider as you think through this.
If I can jump in, I think one ability of this this review board would be the ability to accept complaints directly, independent of the police department.
And to add on to that, I think they should be able to accept ones if the person wants to remain anonymous.
Thank you for adding that, Serafina. How do you guys feel about third-party complaints, if you want to get that specific?
from a personnel perspective, I think that raises issues, as would anonymous, but you know.
Well, I can tell you with anonymous complaints, the cities that do accept them will tell you that they're nearly impossible to investigate.
Right.
If there's any need to follow up. However, it tends to provide an avenue for that complaint still is filed. There's a record of it. And it provides a mechanism for people who feel threatened by the process to come forward in a way they wouldn't have otherwise. But you have to have an office that thoroughly explains to them what happens, what can happen to an anonymous complaint, and that's very little, unfortunately.
I think it also may help though that we are collecting data. So even if a complaint is anonymous, we could still say, you know, we'll add that to our data. It'll just be anonymous. And then that could still be, you know, reviewed and just kind of taken up. Even if we may not be able to investigate it to the fullest extent that it may need to be, at least it's, you know, that person is like, oh, you know, I had a problem and this was the nature of that problem. And then that can just be added to the data. Because a lot of data that people work with just in research is anonymous, and you can still gather a good amount. I would say you can still extract patterns from data even if, you know, your like respondents are anonymous. So I think there's still definitely some value there to it, but you're definitely right that it is a lot harder to investigate those.
And it looks like Chief Malekian put in the chat, which the Santa Barbara Police Department currently takes both third-party complaints and anonymous complaints. So I would think if they're already doing it, that this review board would probably do the same.
So I have to tell you, that's already so far ahead of the curve of many that, particularly third-party complaints. I know the city I was on a review board, we couldn't take third-party complaints, which means if you see something happen or you have videoed something, you can't file the complaint. The only person that can is the person it happened to, which is often someone who doesn't necessarily feel comfortable doing that. So are you, any objection to me adding third-party complaints in there?
What would be the scenario? Like, what would be the scenario or an example of a third-party complaint?
So if you are standing on the side of the street and you see what you believe to be police misconduct, that then you are able to go and file a complaint, regardless of whether the person who was the alleged victim of the police misconduct files a complaint or not. Or you could be a family member of that person. You could be someone who just videoed the incident. So that's an example of what those could be.
I mean, if the police department already accepts both types of complaints, I would be curious to hear the reasoning why this board would not.
Well, maybe Chief Malekian could tell us if it's, I mean, do they have peace officers investigating those? Anonymous or third party? I mean, there's.
Commissioner O'Gorman and commissioners, yes, we do. The scenario that was, the scenario is outlined, we would take that complaint and investigate it, presumably, especially if the officer can be identified, which in the case of video or other things is usually the case. And then we handle it as we normally would. The challenge gets to be if there's not a clear, not sort of a clear violation of policy or law. If it's, and sometimes that happens, and you need the party, the injured party. And if you don't have it, it can be a little bit more challenging. But we do it. I wouldn't say a regular basis because we don't have a lot of complaints, but we do investigate them, and they are part of our annual report.
Thank you, Chief.
I just have one more question about powers and duties. I'm interested in the ability, or like what role the board would play in hiring the actual staff person. So the auditor monitor, because we talked about at the top here of this list, the like having some kind of role in hiring the police chief. But I'm also curious about what kind of role they would play in hiring ultimately the staff, the city staff person in charge of the investigative authorities.
So I will say historically, what has happened is that there is a process separate from the board itself where they hire whether it's the executive director or the auditor monitor. However, recently we are seeing cities who have adopted a method where the board, like I'll use Madison as an example again, where they are entirely in charge of the hiring process of their monitor. It really depends on the city and the common hiring practices, because sometimes there have to be some, I mean, that's way out of the standard for most city practices. But it is being done and it's becoming more common. I will say that it is, I think it's, I don't want to discourage you from that's not what this is for. I just want to give you some thoughts about some of the things that you might want to think about how you could make it easier for board, because you're asking a group of volunteers to who are very concerned and want to do something good for their community. There's a huge learning curve about police policy and civilian oversight in general, so there's a lot of training involved. And sometimes some of them have some experience with hiring practices. I've seen some boards that don't have very much experience, so there also it takes time, and they all do an excellent job in the end, but sometimes it takes an oversight entity a long time to get up and running because there's such a long list of things to learn as they go. So I think that it's fine if it takes a long time, as long as the expectation is that we're starting a new agency and it's going to take a little time for everybody to get up to speed. It's a huge learning curve.
Yeah, and I mean, you're kind of describing like the methodology behind like professional managerial, like city manager style government at all, right? It's to hire someone with experience doing that to handle it versus, you know, elected folks. With all due respect to our elected folks, but yeah, those are really good points, Cami. Thank you for adding that.
But I do also want to make the point, which is going to sound like I'm completely contradicting myself, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time for that. But community members often they're looking for as much independence as possible, so there has to be a weighing there, because having the head of the oversight agency be someone who's hired by community rather than by someone within the city government structure often adds another level of legitimacy to the process in the eyes of the community. There are some issues with doing it that way. So it's really a balancing act of which is more important. Or is there a middle ground in there? There are some cities where the review board is involved in the hiring process, but is not in charge of it. So there are some middle grounds there. I do feel like having as much community involvement in all aspects of it, I mean, it is supposed to be civilian oversight or community oversight of law enforcement. So the more you can have of that, the better. But you also don't want to set up the people you've asked to do it for failure, because there's so many steps and such a large learning curve.
So should we, and I'm curious to hear from other commissioners, or if you don't have any thoughts, that's fine too, but if we should add some kind of role in the hiring of the auditor monitor or other staff person. I see nodding heads.
I think they should have some role. I'm not quite sure what that is yet. I still want to think about that a little bit more. But I mean, this is going to be what the review board is like. They're working with this person directly. So, I mean, you want to make sure that at least to some extent they either have like met this person before through like the interview process, or that, I don't know, they're willing to work with them, or I don't know. But I think there should be some involvement. I'm not quite sure yet though what that would look
It
like.
need to be in partnership, I would imagine, with the city administrator's office. So whether that's input or being on the interview panel, job description, I mean, there can be meaningful input.
I'm also, when I send out that link for those of you who did not receive it for the working document, I'm also going to send you another, because I know you'd like another ordinance to read, but the city and county of Denver has a monitor model that also has a review board, and the review board they are clearly delineated entities. They have very different roles in the process. But the hiring and the yearly review of the monitor, there is involvement from the review board. Members of that review board sit on a panel of, I think it's 5, that includes the chief, I believe the chief, or a representative from the law enforcement agency, the public safety director, and maybe 1 or 2 of the review board members. But I'll highlight that section for you and send it out, because I do think it's another way of looking at how it could happen. Because I also think something that's not on this list of examples, but is probably important as well, is the annual review of the auditor monitor, and to be involved in that process as well. And I will highlight that section of the ordinance as well, because they go into detail about who they receive input. So they allow not only community input, review board input, public safety director, but also law enforcement, to make sure how that interaction is going as well. So I'll definitely send it to you.
They have quite an impressive website. I just pulled it up.
Yes, and in fact, they're looking for a new monitor right this moment. So they're in the midst of their hiring process.
Can we make sure we have a cool website to the powers and duties?
I think it helps, or it would help.
Well, and it's a really important part of community outreach, right?
Yeah, they take complaints on the website here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, joking aside, I think that's a great idea, right? Because we've had a lot of community input about how awkward this commission's website can be to actually find information. So yeah, I think the ability to somewhat control or direct the public facing interface of a web portal or something would be really important.
Yeah, the city's Santa Barbara's template for websites, no offense, Sam, or anybody, but it's always been challenging to find stuff.
No offense taken, Commissioner Gorman, and the city is working to revamp its entire city website. It's a long process, so thank you though.
Yeah, I mean, you do a great job. It just, yeah.
And just on that note, making sure that all the communications are accessible. to folks that speak different languages and also have different abilities.
Yeah. Yeah, and the meetings as well.
All right, my typing is horrible this evening. Okay.
So is this the section where we also want to say recommendations of additional investigation of complaints? I mean, I feel like that might need to go in here since that's a big part of what we're doing. And I don't know, I was reading in other cities documents that you sent, Cami, but also recommendations for, you know, after that review happens, recommendations for discipline. That's up to be talked about.
Okay. Okay. Anything else we have? And I apologize, we completely missed the hour mark where I had intended for everybody to have a little bit of a break. Okay, we have about 30 minutes left in our 2-hour meeting. So I want to make sure everybody has put down everything that they are thinking of now. And I think I should just remind all of you and everyone that's listening that this is a working document. So if something comes up later and you're like, no, we can't do that, or oh my gosh, we forgot, we can add it. So this isn't a done deal. So before, I would like us to spend, if everyone's okay with it, the last half hour talking about purpose. I also would like to talk to you about the possibility of an additional working group, or kind of morphing. I know that the working group that Mary and Rich are still on is kind of at a lull until we really get ramped up. I think that it would be great to have a working group who begins to take these brainstorming sessions and putting them down into usable language that then the commission can then start hacking away at or approving. And you know, I can do that for you, but I feel like it's really important for it to be in the language of the commission, that it's done by people who live in the community. And so I feel like it would be essentially a writing working group. And I know we've kind of mentioned that in the past, having one. I think now is the time to really do that. Now, I say that I want to be very clear that this is not the work. I'm not envisioning this as a working group that writes the recommendations that you're going to use. This is just the next step in narrowing this down, because I think that we have some amazing words and ideas that are down now. I think it will help you in the next phases of the discussion if you have something to edit.
Could we put that on the agenda for next time, or to create another committee, or?
Well,
I don't know.
I think we were thinking of maybe forming one tonight during this item, if there are people who wanted to be a part of that work group.
And I'll meet with the work group. I will help as much as you'd like me to in that process. I I feel like it's better if it's in your words and not mine.
Well, I'm willing to help. You want?
I'll help.
I can
think-
also do that as well.
I wanted to put it off, but
Yeah, I'm game for this too, because this is an important step.
Mary, Serafina, Louisa, Rachel.
I think Anna also said that she'll help, and I'm happy to join in as support as well.
how many numbers?
Yeah, what are we limited to?
5.
6 is yeah, 5 is what we've been going with for best practice, and 6 is the absolute max.
I mean, this is going to be a heavy lift. Like, if maybe there's a time to go to 6. This might be it, right?
Because I also think that it can be divided and conquered a little bit, particularly since these are very much drafts.
Yeah. All right, Jordan, do you want to be the 6th?
Well, one thing I do want to put out there is giving commissioners who are not currently a part of a work group an opportunity to get involved as well.
Good point.
And just for the commission as well, Ana Zepeda's, Vice Chair Zepeda's mic is not working, but she has also volunteered to participate. Let me see if I can unmute her. I may not be able to, so. And then also if I can just clarify those names, just for purposes of a motion, I just need the correct names.
I think we're still working on it. Do we want to maybe take a quick break and then come back in and tackle this, the work group?
Well, I think we only have like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
If we would, I'd be in favor of powering through, but
Okay.
also if anyone needs one.
I mean, I guess I assumed Gabe kind of meant to like give people a second to like decide if they might want to volunteer to be part of this working group, because it's a heavy lift to just say decide right now so we can push on. Or I mean, if we want, Mary's suggestion as well is like, do we want to give people a little time offline to think about it, and maybe just email the chair and vice chair?
I just think it would be helpful to add some definition to it. Just, I mean, it is an important group, but
Kind of like are you saying, Mary, that it would help if there was kind of a written description of the thought of what they'd be doing?
well, more or less. I mean, especially if we're going to have 6 people taking on what is essentially a writing group, even though we're not calling it that. Maybe that's something we could do between now and then, is to maybe just come up with a sort of definition of.
Sorry.
I was just going to ask Cami if you could give a definition, like for instance, subpoena power. Like how would someone build that out in a way that was most meaningful?
Specifically, subpoena power, you mean as something that the working group would be doing?
Yeah, so if someone was tackling that, trying to build that out in the voice of our community, what would that look like?
So I think to start with, it would be looking at templates from other cities of how they've kind of laid it out, and then looking at the things that have been brainstormed. And I will say, we're not the writing group, since we don't have a better name for it right now, but would take the considerations of what's been talked about, or take into consideration what's been talked about in the board, and then saying, like, for instance, subpoena power, then essentially it would just be outlining that subpoena power was one of the powers and duties, and what that might look like. I don't think the writing group really needs to get too specific, because particularly with something like subpoena power, or other things like subpoena power, because there are some legalities around that I don't think the writing group needs to take on. for the most part, it's about starting to narrow down the recommendations and putting them in a language that then starts to transform into what will be your final recommendations. I think this will help a lot when we start talking about composition and all of those trainings, because there was a lot of contradictory thoughts about training and composition, and having this down is going to be able to focus the conversation and have you be able to come to agreement on some of those items. So you're not going to have super specific knowledge about what the subpoena power will look like, how it's exercised. It's more about subpoena power will be exercised by a majority vote of the board. That's just an example. And since I'll be working with that group, anytime anything comes up, I can start shooting very specific examples that deal with that, so that then that committee can look at how it might be best written. We'll share those examples with the full commission, so that when you have the discussion about what the writing working group brings forward, you all have the same information, but you at least have a much more concise, focused document to start kind of finalizing.
So if I can clarify, so you're more talking about, we're not going to be adding things that we haven't talked about, other than framing it in a narrative that flows. I guess ultimately it'll flow from the purpose.
Yeah, I see it as a drafting group. You're taking what's here and putting it in a rough draft for us to review.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Thank you, Jordan. That's much clearer than I said it in about 5 paragraphs worth of speech. Thank you. Well, and it doesn't mean that you can't add things in later. It just means that this group is not adding things of its own free will.
You're like, oh, I want to do this too.
But did I hear someone wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think it was Demo.
Yeah, this was. I just wanted to volunteer as well for the working group, for the writing drafting group. Thank you.
I'm going to retract my name. I think I'm going to focus on the survey, and I think, yeah, if other folks who aren't in a working group, they should do this.
I will also retract my name. I have enough to do with the education group.
And Cami, if I could ask a clarifying question, is this between this meeting and the next, is this work group creating a written version of the brainstorming session that we've had for each of these sections? So for purpose, for power and duties, for composition, or are they just focusing on purpose and that'll guide some of our other conversations?
Yeah, so I think that what I would suggest, because we still need to, I think purpose is definitely something that should happen between now and the next meeting, because I really feel like that's going to help all of you start to formalize a vision. However, I don't want to push it further than that before the next meeting. I think trying to get as much in the next month would be great, because I can keep you plenty busy at the next commission meeting talking about the auditor powers and duties. And we can try to get through as much of that as possible at the next meeting, so that then the following meeting, we can talk about the drafts and start to finalize. I'm open to suggestion. That is just what's working in my head right this moment.
Would they be presenting an update at the next meeting?
I think that would be great, because it's a really important work to the commission as a whole. And I do think that if they can get some drafts done of the purpose, that then we could start the conversation at the next meeting about that specifically.
Have we talked about purpose though? Is that in the working document? Okay.
It is. It was the very first thing, so it's
okay.
Things ago. So I will send, I
Okay.
will try to send you all that document tonight, the link for those who didn't get it. And then I do have a list of some other things I'm going to send you, and that might happen tomorrow, but I'll try to get that out tonight for you. Okay, so Gabe, how would you like to proceed as far as finalizing the people on the working group?
How many individuals do we have that expressed interest?
So I think I'm missing someone at this point, but I have Serafina, Mary, Anna, and Demo.
And Jordan, I think. Or...
Oh, Christian, did you volunteer? Okay. Jordan, did you volunteer?
Yeah.
As need be, if I'm happy to help as need be, but again, if other folks are not on a committee, feel free to. I would encourage you to step up. I'm also happy to be like fresh eyes before we show it to the whole group. If you need like a certain process in between that, I'm happy to be that support.
Thanks, Jordan. And then I would also say that this is going to be some work, and so there may be moments where someone needs to step off the working group, and someone else can step in. But I think having the core group start, and then I like the idea of fresh eyes to look at it too. Okay.
I think that would be a requirement just because of the Brown Act, right?
What can you give a little more context? Sorry.
Well, if we're sharing, working group drafts with other commissioners before a meeting, that would be like the chain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah.
What we can do though is, and I think what's probably more common with committees is submitting a draft, a few days before the meeting. So then, between that time and the meeting, other commissioners can think of what they want to opine about, I guess, give input.
If I may, yes, Commissioner O'Gorman, that's probably the best idea, and especially if the recent decision on drafts too for public transparency. What you'd want to do is you want to submit that to the whole committee, then to discuss in the following as a whole group to the whole the whole board, and then the public can also see that too. So it'd be a draft both for the commission to talk to in that meeting that night, and the public would see it as well. That would be the most optimal way to handle it.
Mary, because this is a big lift, do you want to move forward with joining the survey working group too, or do you want to just focus on this one? Because you were right there, you were moving over to the other one too.
Yeah, this might for now do it. Yeah, I was glad to be part of the meeting with Jill, and so for now, between now and the next meeting, for sure, I think this will be enough.
Yeah, because I think the survey working group is going to, well, meet soon with CCI, start doing questions. So we're probably doing a lot between now and then too.
Right, and then, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Rachel.
Right.
If
I
I
just don't want to
can,
leave you off of doodle polls.
if I can, maybe asking Louis if you're interested. I know you don't have a work group right now. If you're interested in joining the survey group.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be honored to, Gabe.
Awesome.
I know that the other working groups kind of have a person who's just kind of the informal head of the group that works on communication and scheduling meetings. Is there someone in this group that wants to take that on?
I'd be happy to do it.
Okay. Thanks, Christian. And I can help with that as well if you need me to help with doodle polls and all that fun
Yeah.
stuff.
So just as far as like a delivery date, we talked about just so we're all together talking about this right now. We have next meeting, which will be focused on the specific authorities and procedures of the auditor monitor role. And then the meeting after that will be a presentation of the draft.
So I'm hoping for the next meeting that the working group can come up with a draft of the purpose only for discussion.
Mhm.
And that, but also in not the next meeting, but the meeting following that, then we can look more at the other drafts that have been created. I think that purpose is a really important one. I feel like it's a new group. You got to get organized and all of that in 2 weeks. So let's just stick to the purpose for now, and then you can work on the others following the next meeting.
Okay, sounds good. So
It's my thought, but
what is
know.
what is the date? So 2 Wednesdays from now, so that would be the 27th.
Yes.
Cool.
Correct. All right, so to confirm, the writing group is Mary, Christian, Demo, Serafina, and Anna.
And we're going to pick up Lewis on the survey committee.
Correct.
Chair, can you repeat those names one more time?
Yep. It is Mary, Christian, Demo, Serafina, and Anna.
Got it. Do you want to formalize that in a motion?
Sure. Can we get a motion to approve the formation of this, do we want to call it the writing group? Drafting group, of the drafting group.
I make that motion.
Mary makes the motion. Do we have a second? Second for Christian. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Can we do a roll call vote, Sam?
Sure. So
Or
there's.
do we want to open up public comment first?
Give me 1 second. If there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on this item, which is the appointment of the drafting working group, please click on the hand raise feature. I don't see any hands raised. So we will move on to the motion was made by Commissioner O'Gorman, seconded by Commissioner Alonso to appoint Commissioner Chavez, Commissioner Adam Malikan, Commissioner O'Gorman, Commissioner Alonso, and Vice Chair Cepeda to the drafting working group. So we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Adam Malikan,
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso.
Wait.
Aye.
Go ahead.
Jordan has a.
What did I
I
miss?
don't think so.
Okay, just sorry.
Did you want to be a part of that group?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Sorry.
All right, so I will continue with the roll call. Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman,
Yes.
and Commissioner Reynaud,
Affirmative.
and Vice Chair Zepeda. Motion passes, Chair.
Thank you. Cami, did we want to discuss anything else on this topic?
No, thank you, everyone. I think that this is a really good step in helping you to start seeing some really concrete things. So thank you, everyone. I think since we have what, 10 minutes left, less than. I don't know. Why don't I turn it back over to you, Gabe, and I don't think we have time to really take on purpose at this point.
Okay, that sounds good. So we can close out this item and move on to the next item, which I'll ask for someone to continue into the next meeting. I've been putting it on the agenda, or we've been putting on the agendas in case we had a really, really productive meeting. Yes, Rachel.
So can I just ask a quick question, just because it's purpose? I mean, does there need to be any further discussion around purpose to help the new working group do what they need to do before the next meeting?
Cami said we did it already.
Okay. I mean, if it was on the agenda as something to discuss further, just wanted to make sure.
So I think that I think with this working group in place, I think there is a lot for them to work with. And when we present that draft, you will all have the working document that will have the brainstorming. So you will know what is included in their draft and what might not have been included, and that will be the jumping off point for the conversation. So we'll still have that conversation when we do the draft, but I think it's okay if we push it over to the next meeting.
All right. We'll close out this item. We will move on to the next one, discussion on auditor monitor authorities and procedures. If I could ask for a motion to continue this to our next meeting, which is on October 27th.
I move to move this item to the October 27th meeting.
Second.
So motion from Louisa, second from Rachel.
All right, let me just ask if there's anyone in the public that would like to speak on this. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on the discussion and auditor monitor item? Please raise your hand. Click on the hand raise icon. Seeing none, we will proceed with the roll call. So there's motion by Commissioner Wood, seconded by Commissioner Rachel Johnson to continue this item until the October 27th meeting. We will do a roll call vote. Commissioner Adam Malikan,
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso,
Yes.
Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Gorman,
Yes.
Commissioner Reynaud,
Affirmative.
and Vice Chair Zepeda. Motion passes.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to the next item, which is future business. I didn't draft up a mock-up of the minutes or the agenda for next meeting, but I figured probably looks pretty similar to today's with announcements, meeting, minutes, and then working group updates, followed by the auditor monitor authorities and procedures. And we can make the purpose discussion either part of the working group update or its own item. Open to feedback on that. And it looks like Anna has some future business that she would also like to add, and I do too as well. Sam, is it possible to unmute Anna?
Chair, I've tried to unmute her, but I'm unable to. Let me try one more time. I'm going to try to unmute you, Vice Chair, see if that works.
Yeah, so she put it in the group chat and it said, had a question about the community cafes and if we can please check about November dates for these outreach groups. Sam, can we work together to start reserving spaces for November if that's when we're thinking about doing community cafes?
Sure, we can try to coordinate and, by all means, reach out to either me or John Doimus, and we'll see what we can do to, what your needs are and how we can assist.
Wait, is that what the
On it.
contractor's going to be doing? The consultant?
I was thinking
Yeah,
more
I
of
just want to
booking
clarify what that means.
booking
Like actually
spaces is the
reserving
best.
spaces in the city to hold them. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, the CCI is going to
Hello?
help with the facilitation of those.
Oh.
Yeah.
Vice
Anna's
Chair,
on, I believe.
you're unmuted now. You can speak if needed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted for future business, I know that we all have like great organizations and groups that we would like represented. So maybe this is something that we can bring up for next meeting of like potential groups that we would like for November. And then either having it like Chair Escobedo was saying, like at like city locations, or if we could have it at community locations too. So maybe that's something we can simmer on for next meeting. But, and then also thank you everybody for being very extremely patient with me today. It was a mission getting on this meeting, but I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you, Anna. And that kind of leads me to my next question is, for our future meetings, is it possible to have these on Zoom? I know that our contract is supposed to be ending soon, and there's a possibility of going to Zoom. The accessibility is much better, and it was unfortunate that we didn't have Anna on the call today for most of the meeting.
Yes, Chair Escobedo, Commission, we are looking to go to transferring to Zoom for the reasons you just said: accessibility, able to have more people, and holding all our meetings, City Council, all the different boards and commissions due to accessibility issues. So we'll update very near on that, but that's what we're working on as a city to do that.
Are we saying an update before next meeting? Hopefully.
I'll try. I'll find out.
Okay.
Absolutely.
We'll work with you. We have City Administrator Rebecca Bjork here.
I'm sorry, I haven't got my I transitioned to home and my camera's not working quite right. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, we are moving to Zoom. We are going to try first with our city council. I believe that date is October 26th, and we are very anxious to roll it out to the rest of the boards and commissions. I don't think that is in time for your next meeting, which is before that, but we will certainly take a look and see if there's a way to facilitate that. It's something I'm very interested in.
Our next meeting is the day after, so maybe we can make it work for our next meeting. Hopeful thinking, maybe. Okay. So, Ms. Bjork.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, we can certainly do our best, and I will try and prioritize that with our trainer and make sure it works. Sorry, I was trying to turn on my voice, not my camera. No problem. Thanks.
Thank you. That's good news. Anything else for this item?
Just on that note, so can you clarify or someone clarify what these groups are, or what these bringing in the community is, like what that function is? Like, is this the outreach to various nonprofits to get their perspective, or?
Yeah, in part of the scope of work and also the outreach is doing something called community cafes, where they're essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong from the survey group if I get this wrong at all, but they're essentially focus groups or forums for getting feedback. I was thinking when we have something to go out to the community and say, here's our first go of a recommendation, to gather feedback based on what that is. And so I believe what Anna was mentioning is identifying who those key stakeholders are. There's obviously a lot of stakeholders, but identifying the stakeholders we would hold those community cafes with.
Yeah, and just to add a little to that, Gabe, this is something we talked about with CCI when we met with them about the scope of work, that basically saying that all of us as commissioners are kind of our ambassadors to a number of different communities, so that we would be taking, each of us would take the lead, hopefully, in identifying specific groups we want to reach out to in the focus group setting, in addition to emailing the survey or providing written surveys, and that the CCI consultants would help us facilitate those, and they would be the ones sort of gathering the feedback and the qualitative stories and data that came out of those to then work into the report. So they're very related to the surveys. Yeah.
So then that would incorporate to the list that the committee I was on have been putting together. I guess that's
Yes.
the same thing. Right.
Yeah, I think that was like my understanding was that's a big master list of all the different kind of outreach possibilities. And then we as commissioners would look at that list and be like, okay, these are the ones that I'm connected to, or that, we feel,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, great. And because I think in a previous meeting, there was mention of some groups coming in and presenting to us. That's no longer happening?
No.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
All right. Any other questions? If not, Sam, if there's any public comment for this item.
For future business, give me 1 second. If there's anybody in the public that would like to speak on the future business item of the agenda, please click on the hand raise icon. I don't see any, Chair.
All right. Well, with that, we will close out this item, and that is the last item for tonight. So everyone, yep.
Chair,
Sam?
just one comment. With Commissioner Reynaud is now no longer an alternate. He's now a full participant of the commission. So just want to welcome him in that new role.
Yes, thank you for remembering that. I should have said that in announcements. So.
Thank you, Sam.
But that is all, Chair and Commissioners. Have a great night and great week.
Have a great night. Be safe, everyone. Go Dodgers.
Yeah.
Controversial ending. Wow.
It's nice of them not to play tonight. All right. All right. Bye,
Have
everyone.
a good night, all.